Hello, Summit County. I am Dave Rossi here with another edition of County Connection. I've brought a Summit High School Tiger with me, but I've also brought Commissioner Tamara Pogue. Say hello.
Good morning, everyone.
So today we are going to be talking about housing. We've got a bunch of things coming up, but the biggest one is February 27th. We're doing our County 101 series called Housing the Missing Middle. Tell me about what the missing middle is.
Missing middle is really housing for folks that have slightly higher area median income, so slightly higher salaries. There are teachers, law enforcement, firefighters, folks like you and I, right, would fall into the missing middle. And traditionally, that's been really hard housing to build because it's difficult to finance. You know, on the lower end of the spectrum, we have something called low income tax credits, and that makes it much more feasible for these projects to work mathematically in terms of dollars and cents. But when you get in that sort of 80% AMI to 140% AMI, that's much harder housing to build. And that's why so many people in Summit County right now are struggling to find housing.
So give me an example of some housing that exists around the county that fits this definition.
So one county project is Dillon Valley Vistas over in Dillon Valley. Those are some townhomes. Smith Ranch has a component of middle income housing. Alta Verde, the new development in Breckenridge, that will also have a component of middle income housing.
So when you're talking about housing policy at the county and we have these conversations, a lot of times the question is, why not just continue to build, build, build? But we have a lot of different programs. So there's strategies, and can you cover some of the more confusing ones like preservation and adaptive reuse? Let's start with adaptive reuse. What's that?
So adaptive reuse is really taking an existing structure like a commercial building or like a hotel and transitioning it into workforce housing. And I know there's this sort of narrative out in the community that it's sort of unfair for our workforce to be living in hotels when our tourists are living in the homes. And I absolutely hear that. But if you are looking at a continuum of housing products, it is really quick and very cost effective to take those vacant hotels and make them appropriate for our workforce. So that's certainly a part of our strategy. We've done 2 hotel conversions so far, the Loge over in Breckenridge and Alpine Inn in Frisco. And our third one should be coming online pretty quickly here, and that'll be the Days Inn in Silverthorne.
So does the county buy these buildings or what?
Not always. I mean, certainly there are instances like the Loge where it makes sense to buy them because eventually what we'll do is knock them down and rebuild with a higher density on that parcel. But for the short term, really a master lease is better. And so for the Alpine Inn, we have a master lease where we just pay the rent every month and then folks pay us for their rent when they move in. Same with the Days Inn.
So are they hotel rooms that people are living in? It sounds like the Days Inn might have some more opportunity for different kinds of units.
Yeah, Days Inn is great because it's a little bigger than what we've done in the past 2, and that means we do have more unit types. So there'll certainly be your traditional studio hotel room types, but there are also some 2 and 3 bedrooms in there. Some units have kitchens, some units will have a communal kitchen. Really depends, I think, on what your income is, and if you have a slightly higher income, you might be able to afford some of those larger units.
Great. So getting to preservation, I think everybody knows what the word preservation means, but give me an example in housing talk, what that means.
So this is really the conversation around short-term rentals, but preservation means protecting the units that are naturally occurring for your workforce. Mobile home parks are traditionally referred to as naturally occurring affordable housing. But one of the challenges we see in Summit County, and I think that folks have a hard time understanding in the short-term rental conversation, is that we have to preserve every unit we currently have for our workforce. And we've collected a lot of data at the county that's looked at some of our historic workforce neighborhoods like Wilderness, where 5 years ago those units were primarily owned by locals and now they're primarily owned by second homeowners. And so that's the tension in this short-term rental conversation, and it's why we've taken 9 months to be really thorough, to collect all the data, to make sure that what we're doing really does preserve and protect the housing we already have.
Great. So when you're talking about building more housing and you're talking about some of these other strategies, there's a new one that we've been talking about quite a bit, which seems to be very close to launching. That's our ADU plan. Tell everybody about what an ADU is and why would the county go this route?
Right. So there's a strategy called upzoning, which really means you go back to a parcel that was zoned, for example, example, for a single family home, and you allow that parcel to have more density so that you can put some kind of a second unit for folks on that parcel. The best way to do that is through building an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU. So in Summit County, we have sort of a three-pronged approach to working on ADUs. The first thing we did was to redo all of our codes to make it easier for folks to build an ADU. That said, it's still expensive to build an ADU, so now we're looking at some strategies around the affordability of financing those. One option is a grant program that we're going to launch later this spring that will help folks maybe make their ADU more code compliant, might help with some down payments around building that ADU. And then this third piece of this is what we're calling a lending library. So in that lending library, we'll have a complement of plans that are already designed and approved, designed by an architect, approved by the county. So really you can come in, get your permit, and start construction within 10 days is our goal.
Wow, so that's saving quite a bit of money for somebody. Quite
a bit of money, quite a bit of time, and it allows the homeowner of that parcel to actually generate some additional income. So we hear a lot, again, in that short-term rental conversation about our primary homeowners who are trying to find ways to generate additional income, and we certainly want to protect that primary homeowner opportunity. But another way to do it is to actually build an ADU on your property and then have long-term revenue on that parcel.
That's great. So when you're talking about all these strategies, give me an example of putting those things to work as far as construction goes. So for example, the Justice Center is a collaborative project with the town of Breckenridge. Where does that fit in the actual strategies that you and the housing department are working on?
Yeah, I think our goal here is to make sure that we have housing across the economic spectrum in Summit County. So the Justice Center, in the last housing needs assessment that we did, we saw that the biggest need was really rental housing. So, you know, Town of Breck has been a great partner in that parcel. It was a piece of land that the county owned, and then we're working with Breckenridge to develop it. They're obviously providing the infrastructure. It's a modular development, and it'll be sort of, I would call lower moderate income, but kind of that 60 to 120% window for rental housing. And because we're doing modular, it's much quicker than development would typically take for housing. So we are hoping that folks will be able to move in at the end of next year.
That's great. So when you're talking again about these projects that have a wide variety of purposes and they're addressing certain elements of it, where does the state become involved, and where does state regulation play a role, either positively or some of the challenges with how things are going on at the Capitol?
You know, construction costs what construction costs, and Summit County has a challenge because construction and land are very expensive. In order to make something more affordable for folks, you have to buy it down or subsidize it, and those subsidies can come from a variety of different places. Certainly locally in Summit County, we've been really lucky that voters support funding for affordable housing, but even that is not enough. And so you have to rely on state and federal dollars to close that gap. Traditionally, state dollars were really capped at 80% AMI, which is one of the reasons we don't have a lot of middle-income housing in Summit County. Last year, working with Senator Roberts on the Affordable Housing Task Force, for the first time we were able to pass legislation that will let us access dollars up to 140% AMI. It's a huge change. You know, historically in Colorado, less than 12% of funding has gone to rural or rural resort communities for housing, and this really will move that needle. So federally, it's actually even worse. It's a lower AMI, and Representative Neguse now is working on some legislation that would change that federal floor and allow us to access dollars for housing at higher AMIs. So I'm excited that some of these things are starting to change, because the more money we have at our, available to us, the more housing we can build.
That's great. So it looks like we've elevated our housing director. It now plays a very prominent role in the organization. Yep. So that's one sign of a commitment to housing that you guys are working on. Give me a sense of about how many units the county has built of affordable housing.
You know, I think if you look at the county and the towns, I think we have the second highest number of deed restricted units in the state, next to Pitkin County. So I want to say that's around 3,000 units countywide, but don't quote me on that. It could be a little bit off. So certainly Summit County government has been building affordable housing since the mid-'80s. We have one of the most aggressive housing plans in the state right now. You know, in last year's budget, we allocated $20 million to housing. That's a staggering amount of money for one sort of subject matter. As you said, we also have elevated our housing director. That position now reports directly to the county manager, where historically it was not that senior of a position. And I think we've got, in addition to the work we're doing on preservation and reuse, I think we also have 6 or 7 housing projects that we're trying to build and move forward right now. We have a partnership with Habitat for Humanity that I'm really excited about. That is going to be in Summit Cove. Certainly we're adding additional density in Keystone to the Wintergreen Ridge project. We are working with the town of Breck on the Justice Center, which we just talked about. We have a small parcel in Bill's Ranch that we're working on doing some tiny homes for the first time, so excited about that one. And then obviously the 2 biggest ones are Lake Hill and the U.S. Forest Service project, which is over in Dillon, and Lake Hill is in Frisco. You know, Lake Hill, I call it my labor of love. It was 18 years when I inherited it, or when we inherited it, this BOCC, and that's certainly far too long. The biggest challenge with Lake Hill is water and sewer. Pretty excited that last week we had our first conversation with the state about getting water and sewer facilities through their permitting process. Great partnership there. They were very excited about the project and are really happy to lean in and help us move that forward. So my goal is to break ground on Lake Hill in 2025, and right now we're on. It'll be a challenge, but hopefully we can get there.
That's pretty innovative, because if we look back at the history of Lake Hill, it was really fostered by then Congressman Jared Polis, who is now the governor. He's taken a special interest in seeing this through.
Yeah.
How does that, is that helping at the state level for the county?
It's definitely helpful. The governor's interest has really made all of his state departments focus on this project. And, you know, we have to get through some permitting at the Department of Natural Resources. We've got to get through some permitting at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and then we also have some work to do with CDOT, Colorado Department of Transportation. And so the governor is sort of saying this is a priority for this administration. It is a really big deal for us.
That's great. Do you think when people say that Summit County really is leading the way, or one of the leading counties in tackling and mitigating the housing challenge that's statewide, true or false?
I mean, that's certainly what I hear. I always, and I'm proud of the work that this BOCC is doing in the housing space. We're being really innovative. We are really focusing on the challenge. That said, I think if you're someone right now who is living in their car or is sharing, you know, a 1-bedroom with 4 or 5 other families, it's not enough, and it's certainly not enough for me. So there is much more to be done, but I do think we're putting some great things in place right now.
So are there things on the horizon that you can tell us about that may be in your back pocket that have not come to fruition yet, that are just sort of visionary plans, or is that just something that people need to just kind of pay attention to going forward?
I mean, always pay attention. There's lots of things that are rolling out and lots of new opportunities for housing as we move forward. And so certainly keeping an eye on our housing website, keeping an eye on the Housing Authority's housing website is always a good idea. You know, the U.S. Forest Service project, we haven't talked about that, but that's over in Dillon, and we're working closely with our partners at the U.S. Forest Service and also with the town of Dillon to try and get that one ready to go as soon as possible. We have a great developer partner, Servitas, who's working with us. They are really leading the way in the middle income housing sector, so we're lucky to have them on board as well. And then I think, you know, increasingly as Summit County gets built out, we're having lots of conversations with the surrounding counties about how we can partner with them. And so I think that's one thing to watch, those conversations in the next couple of years. The
U.S. Forest Service parcel is, I think, the first of its kind in the country. Yeah. How did that happen here? Well, Lake Hill was the first of its kind in the country because it was the first purchase of land from the U.S. Forest Service for affordable housing. There's obviously parcels of land that the U.S. Forest Service doesn't want to sell, but would be appropriate for workforce housing. And so they, in the Farm Bill in 2018, made it possible for communities like ours to lease land from the Forest Service.
So the Highway 51 project would be the first lease of land in the nation. Once again, we are going first, and there are lots of other communities watching us to see how this goes. But it is very innovative, and it's a long-term lease that we'll get from them, and then we will put rental housing, middle-income rental housing on that parcel as well.
So that road really is right along US 6. That parcel is right along US 6.
Yeah,
so it's not in the middle of the US forest.
No, it's not in the middle. No. It's where the US Forest Service has had their administrative facility for many years, and so we will rebuild that facility for them. We will also provide some housing for the US Forest Service workforce because they've had a really hard time. We're the busiest national forest in the country, and they've had a really hard time staffing. So that'll provide some housing for them, and then working with Dylan will also provide housing for the community.
And wildfire, there'll be some wildfire mitigation or wildfire administrative.
Yeah, there'll be additional space for the administration or the staff that you need for the administration of wildfire defense. Some additional capacity for mitigation. So there is actually a public safety component to this, not just workforce housing.
And Friends of the Dillon Ranger District might have
I think
a
Friends
role
of
in there?
the Dillon Ranger District might also have some space in this facility. So,
that's fantastic. Anything else on the housing front before we get to this panel? Because this panel is really going to be talking about, like you said, building this missing middle here with Servitas, who is the partner, the developer partner in the U.S. Forest Service, and they're going to be speaking on the panel.
They are.
So why here? Why do people from the state capitol want to come up here, and who is this event for?
Yeah, I mean, this event is really for anyone who's interested in housing. I suspect there'll be a lot of folks that are more policymakers, other commissioners or municipalities, but I also think it's an opportunity for our local workforce to learn more about what's coming. There are a lot of conversations going on in the state right now around housing. I think there's something like 17 or 18 bills this session alone just dedicated to housing issues. And the governor is very invested in this housing conversation. So he looks at this conversation from the perspective of how do we use our land in Colorado. And land use has traditionally been the purview of local government. And so we're now having a conversation about where is that working, where is that not working, where can the state be more deeply engaged. So we'll have a couple of members of his staff that are here to talk a little bit about what they're looking at and the ways that they think they can be helpful in this conversation. We will also have some partners from the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. They are the sort of lenders of workforce housing projects in the state, and also the Division of Housing. The Division of Housing traditionally has worked with local governments to fund some of these projects through grants and gap financing. And then Servitas, who's our developer partner for the U.S. Forest Service. They are experts in middle-income housing, and so they're going to speak a little bit to what are the traditional challenges of building housing in this space. And then our housing director, Jason Dietz, who will cover all of the strategies that we've forgotten to talk about and more. So it should be a really interesting panel, certainly a lot of really smart folks that know a lot about housing.
That's great. So February 27th at 11 in the morning at Community and Senior Center, and there will be light lunch provided, and you're going to hear from a lot of experts, all things housing, policy, development, and implementation are going to be key topics covered. Plus, we're going to cover lots of our projects that are going to be happening in the county or are ongoing. Plus the exciting code audit, which is changing the code in the county. Staff's going to be on hand to tell people about it. There'll be easels in the lobby and food. What else could you ask for? What could be more fun? I don't know. There's lots going on in this county, but housing is really it right now. Thanks everybody for joining us today. This has been County Connection. If you did see or did miss County Connection, you can always find us at YouTube. And if you want to see the Housing the Missing Middle Housing 101 County 101 event, you can always find it on YouTube. The replays will happen after February 27th, but hope you can join us live at the Senior Center on the 27th at 11 in the morning.